News Radio 600 Kogo. It's San Diego Business Saturday. Great to have you along today. What a week on Wall Street. The Uber IPO. The China anxiety tweets. A roiling market. Yet we're all still here for a Mother's Day weekend on News Radio 600 Kogo. Today's Christine Augustin from UBS Financial to tell you how to get yourself away from the cliff when you see weeks like this on Wall Street. Also, Patrick DeHaan from GasBuddy.com is going to give us a hand and tell us what's going on with gas prices. And I'm really excited to talk to Joe Kudla. Joe Kudla is the CEO and founder of a San Diego brand in a company called Vuori. There's 5 million men in this country that practice yoga. I don't happen to be one of them, but none of them were brand loyal until Vuori came along. In fact, Joe will tell you the story on how most men that practice yoga were embarrassingly shopping at their wives' Lululemon store. All that coming up on San Diego Business Saturday. All right, so let's get right into it. Boy, I'll tell you. So you heard me on the morning show this week with Ted Garcia. LaDonna was out this week, but filling in for George Chamberlain. And it was really interesting for me to watch sort of what happened in the markets today, because at one point on Monday, now keep in mind, President Trump had a weekend threat to raise tariffs on $200 billion in annual imports from China from 10% up to 25%. But he also threatened another 25% on basically the rest of the stuff that China exports to us. And long story short, imports as well are being affected. So look, it may well have been a typical negotiating tactic by the president. But the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, and the S&P were all rattled. At one point, I think in my 740 business hit with Ted on Monday, every single stock on the Dow Jones 30 was down, with the exception of one. Can you guess which one that was? Chevron, of course. It was a gas stock. That day, the Dow had fallen as much as 650 points at its lowest. At the end of the day, we were down just by 0.25%. All right. So that's what happened Monday. Tuesday, sort of the same. Wednesday, we eked out a 2-point gain. You saw the rest of the week. The rest is history. Even though the markets have been a bit rough, you have to keep days like this in perspective, especially when considering we've experienced the longest bull market in the history of this country, roughly 3,700 days or better. You have to remember that. The S&P bottomed out in March 2009. That was right after the financial crisis. Since then, stocks have grown by well over 300%. I was doing a keynote yesterday to the Top Producers Club, bunch of real estate professionals here in town, and I know many of you listen. And I was telling them, look, I know you're real estate people. There's only 2 paths to wealth in this country. One of them is owning real estate. The other one is owning a business. Well, if you're not an entrepreneur, you can still own a business. You can own a little piece of Apple. You can own a little piece of Qualcomm. You can own a little piece of this, a little piece of that. You can even own a little piece of Uber now. But for real estate folks, their path to liquidity is real estate. But what I told them is, look, you have to look at the stock market as an open-air indicator to the economy. They are not the same thing. The economy is not, the stock market is not the economy. But boy, the economy is a good leading indicator on how the economy is doing. If you consider how different the Dow is compared to what it was when our grandparents were investing, think in terms of that. They had things like U.S. Steel on the Dow. Okay? ITT was on the Dow. All right? Now, we still have companies like Caterpillar. All right? And we still have companies like GE, but we used to have GM. GM's no longer on the Dow. All right? We now have companies like Apple and Nike, Home Depot, Walmart, Visa, Verizon, Microsoft, McDonald's. Look, there's still some of the stalwarts here. but you've got different companies representing a snapshot of what the economy is doing. That's why it's so important to take a look at the Dow. And that's why when we have weeks like we've had, it affects everyone. And look at what a great example of how fear and greed manipulate the markets. Look, only 55% of Americans have investments in the stock market. So if the stock market is doing well or poorly, many people's finances are not affected directly. Yet, most of us will affect the stock market by doing business with companies who are publicly traded. Simple as that. Good news is U.S.-China trade stocks are happening. Bad news is the markets take a blip every once in a while, but you have to keep it in perspective. And here to talk about that, and probably the person who can calm you the most, and certainly calms me the most, Christina Gustin, Senior Wealth Advisor, UBS Financial, RKG Wealth Management. So I know that you've trained your clientele in your advisory account position to where they don't panic when they see days like this. But still, I guarantee this was a busy week for you. You have to admit it, right, Christina?
Very busy. Thanks for having me. Good morning, of course.
So add on to what I was just saying, and then I want to talk about this Uber IPO real quick and put a word of warning out there to people. And I think you know what I'm going to say. But look at it. It's one of those things where we need to keep in mind that we're going to have weeks like this, and it doesn't mean the sky's necessarily falling forever. It just means that we still are in a very reactive period, and sort of the return of volatility for a while. Correct?
Absolutely. No, I think this was a very exciting. Lot of volatility like we haven't seen in a couple months now. And, I think that, so UBS put out their House View Weekly, as we do every week. And I love when the analysts kind of handicap the odds of what they think is going to happen. UBS's stance is still that our base case expectation is not only that the U.S. and China will work out, but that the ultimate deal will probably reduce tariffs from where they are right now. However, they put about a 30% probability of something going sideways. They think overall that this will work out, and that progress was already priced into the market a couple weeks ago. So if it does, our expectation is we would kind of bounce back from this week to where we were, a couple weeks ago, which was again all-time highs.
Look, and if you look at a chart, I mean, let's face it, Christina. I mean, if you just look at a point and figure chart that goes from 2009 to now, weeks like this are barely noticeable. It's when we take a 6-foot view or a 5-foot view versus a 50,000-foot view is when things get a little dicey. And that's what we have to try to avoid doing, correct? Because there's going to be days like this.
Do.
I mean, and look,
yeah.
this tells us how much of a world economy that we're in, right? I mean, this is why we pay attention to what's going on in other parts of the world.
It's really important, and one of the ways that we're trying to get our investors to refocus on their portfolios is to think about, rather than just the shorter term, which equity sector do I think is going to do well in the next 3 to 6 months. Look at these longer term themes and build portfolios around themes like smart mobility, themes like automation and robotics, things like e-commerce that are radically changing industries and are just in the early stages. It helps to give investors a long-term view.
So here's the deal. Christina Gustin joins us here, Senior Wealth Advisor, RKG Wealth Management, UBS Financial. She's our go-to person when it comes to all things stock market, and hopefully we can keep her that way. I'd love you to co-host the show completely. But I have to ask you, the U.S. initial public offering market had its biggest week since 2015 with at least 15 deals priced, including Uber, the biggest U.S. company deal since Facebook in 2012. Most of the companies that went public this week you haven't heard of. Obviously, Uber and Lyft are you have to compare them to each other. Lyft went public just a few weeks ago. Had a very rocky start as a public company. Lyft shares have fallen 15% from their IPO price. And look, this is interesting because you have to keep in mind that during an initial public offering is the first sale of stock issued by a company to the public. And prior to an IPO, the company is considered private with a relatively small number of shareholders. So it's the only time the company that is going public actually gets to keep the money that's coming in. And I have to say that the number one email I got on Kogo and over on the Big Biz Show and on KUSI was, should I buy, what do you think about this Uber IPO? Should I buy the Uber IPO stock? And I had to tell everyone, no, of course not. If you want to buy, this is what I did, just like I did with Facebook. I bought one share of Uber for both of my kids. So, and I will request a stock certificate to frame that. just to have it. But it wasn't an investment because it's a bad investment right now. So and I think any IPO, the day it goes public, is a bad investment for the rest of us who didn't get involved in it. Can you talk about why I'm saying that? Because I know you agree with me.
I can. So I can't comment on specific IPOs, so I'm not really talking about.
But let's just talk about IPOs
that happened this week.
Wait. How about
general,
this? Let's talk about Facebook, for example. When Facebook went public, all right, a very visible IPO. Everybody and their sister wanted to buy, but what happened? That happens with every IPO. The thing spikes, the thing caves, the thing settles out about 3 months later, right?
IPOs are the epitome of this, it's exciting, right? People want to get in on something. There's fear of missing out. One, doubles, quadruples, I want to be a part of that. I think it's psychological, but don't underestimate what a massive transformation that is for a corporation, like you said, to go from private to public. And, I'm a low risk kind of girl, and I want to see earnings. I want to see track record. I want to see that their C-suite can really grow into this new public status, because this is very different as a public company. I need to see a little more track record before I'm ready to invest in a company. And these young companies, listen, some of them will do well and some of them will go away, but I'm not willing to take that kind of risk with my clients' portfolios. You're going to think I'm really boring. I think one of the most exciting asset classes this year has been municipal bonds.
Well, see, and that makes you the most exciting trader on Wall Street this week. Christina, we need it. Next week, we're talking municipal bond funds and why that's exciting to you. Christina Gustin, Senior Wealth Manager, RKG Wealth Management. We'll talk some more about this coming up. Also, Gas Buddy's going to join us. It's San Diego Business Saturday. News Radio 600 KOGO. It's News Radio 600 KOGO. San Diego Business Saturday. Great to have you along today. Thanks again to Christina Gustin, UBS Financial, RKG Wealth Management. Coming up in just a second, we're going to talk to our good friend Patrick DeHaan from GasBuddy.com, because I know that you're wondering what's going on with gas prices in this country, especially in this county. Let me just take a few more minutes and talk a little bit about the IPO with Uber. Because look, Uber and Lyft have two very different business models. Two very, very different business models. Uber, well, let's just go Lyft first. Lyft is easy. Lyft is giving rides to people. Okay? They're strongly focused in the U.S. Uber has global ambitions that extend to food delivery and freight and even healthcare. And if you think in terms of that, this is why, by the way, Uber, who is the largest taxi cab company in the world, and they truly are, they don't own a single cab. They don't have a single employee. So how then, I ask you, how can they be losing money? Well, it's because they are in all of the other spaces. Their piece of the pie, okay? Their piece of the pie that they're going for is very large. If you think in terms of understanding how they lose money. And I'll take you through that later in the program today. But I can tell you, there's a reason they're losing money, because they're going through a global sort of a growth curve here. I think part of what makes this noteworthy is because Uber created the gig economy, and they did a number of things that were really cool. And I will tell you, and again, I'm not purchasing Uber. Okay, I'm not an Uber guy yet. We're going to let this IPO shake out. We're going to let the founding shareholders sell their stock, take their pop, and then when this thing settles out in 3 months, when you can start seeing earnings and such, then we're going to figure out what to do with Uber. Okay, so Uber holds over 65% of the rideshare market in the U.S. and Canada, as well as Latin America, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. I watched the company's 30-minute IPO presentation, and it's clear that the new Uber is operating under a completely different strategy because of the global sort of positioning I've been talking about. You know, they're doing freight as well as food delivery and a number of other things. And it's done so by focusing on the single key ingredient to every successful company I've ever interviewed in 22 years, and that's building trust. They built trust with their consumers because they grew rapidly, because they solved a problem and did it well. They provide convenient, reliable transportation at a relatively low cost. They dealt with the regulators versus fighting with the regulators. In other words, when there was a pushback in certain cities with strong taxi cab lobbies, instead of going to war, Uber was nice about it, and obviously it worked. And then with their investors, could you imagine the pitch? Could you imagine this pitch? Okay, we're going to start the biggest taxi cab company in the world. We're not going to own a single car. We're not going to employ a single driver. I mean, could you imagine being on the other side of that investment pitch? And by the way, Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world at $150 billion with his $1,800 a share Amazon stock, he invested $3 million. Okay, so he has $150,000 million. That's how much he has in money. He has $150,000 million. Okay, he put $3 million in, roughly 0.00002% of his wealth. It would be like you and I investing, $20, $1,000. I don't know. He stands to make $400 million with his investment because he saw this crazy risk. And I think that's what makes it really interesting. The other part that makes this interesting is that you have to ask the question, when will the world's unquenchable thirst for oil finally be satisfied? Because what is one of the biggest top-line expenses, or the biggest top-line expense for Uber? And that's their drivers. What's the driver's biggest top-line expense? Gasoline. So the timing on oil depends on a lot of things, most notably electric vehicles on the road. And because between the global warming argument, Elon Musk, a worldwide crackdown on carbon, the future looks treacherous for big oil. I mean, the rise of Tesla, electric vehicles, they pose this existential threat to the oil industry. Passenger vehicles are the number one source of demand for oil. And tomorrow's transportation system may no longer rely on the gas station. Here to talk about that and more is one of the smartest guys I know in the energy sector, Patrick DeHaan with GasBuddy.com. Patrick, so as you look at the macroeconomics of gasoline, and of course, GasBuddy.com is a great resource for all of us. You can find the best gas price anywhere. They put up a gas price temperature map, and you can sort of see in your area where the cheapest gas is. But boy, from a top-down approach, it's interesting that the electric vehicle craze hasn't even made a dent in oil, even though most oil experts are a little bit afraid of what's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years. Talk about that a little bit for me.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned. There's hundreds of thousands of Teslas on the road, and gasoline demand, as the Energy Information Administration reports, is still very, very healthy. In fact, last week, we are within just a couple percentage points of seeing gasoline demand still hit records. And as you said, there's a lot more electric vehicles out there than there were 10 years ago. So you're to a point now where Tesla adds 200,000 vehicles to the road over the course of the last 5-10 years, but it's offset by Americans that are traveling more and more. A metric from the Department of Transportation, vehicle miles traveled, VMT, is at an all-time record high. So you're offsetting any savings from electric vehicles. I mean, certainly without those EVs on the road, gasoline consumption would surely be at record levels, but we're only seeing a minor dent thus far.
Well, I have to say this because the oil industry's long-term future remains a question mark for all of us just because of technology. I mean, this is the way it is. I mean, look at what happened to the coal industry. Things can turn very quickly, and as I said before, the next 20 years are likely to prove crucial, according to the energy experts. For now, however, the reality is that electric vehicle sales have surged faster than ever, and probably faster than anticipated, but they still represent a very small portion of car sales, which means EVs are hurting oil demand just a little tiny bit. It's not even an issue. And that's why I think, and let's talk about the oil prices, because what did we see this week with respect to oil? Oil was at 61 and change, $62 a barrel. It's still not egregious. I will say that on Monday, when the markets first reacted to the tweets of Donald Trump, the tweets of Donald Trump. All but one stock in the Dow Jones was down that day, and of course it was Chevron. Chevron was up. But from where you're sitting, is there any downside pressure to gas prices because of any imminent technology coming from Tesla or anybody else?
Well, I mean, this is such a slow-moving evolution to go from internal combustion engines to EVs. Obviously Tesla has a much bigger operation today, and other manufacturers, Audi, Ford, GM, looking to diversify and add electric vehicles to their fleets. But still, I think there's this sense of range anxiety that you get when you have an electric vehicle. So Americans aren't making the move as quickly just because it's such a drastic leap to go from a battery power, I should say, a combustion vehicle to a battery powered vehicle. There's not the infrastructure there. Tesla's got great infrastructure, but even they're improving it. So the convenience of filling your tank and being on your way in 3 to 5 minutes still easily supersedes the experience that you get from an electric vehicle, in which you may have to park for 30 plus minutes to get your battery to an appropriate level to continue your journey. So
let's talk about San Diego specifically, because we saw here in California just a few weeks ago when we first had you on the air this season anyway, that gas prices had hit record highs, at least for the recent period of time. Are we seeing any relief? We got that summer blend coming around. I think if you would maybe explain that once again to everyone, because I think that's a mystery to most people what the summer blend is. But I think it comes down to regulations and environmental issues, does it not?
It really does. You go back to the 1990s. That's where all the summer gasoline talk comes from. The Clean Air Act amendments, 1992, basically requiring states to clean up their act. And since then, we've had this transition every year to cleaner gasoline. And now in California, superseding the EPA has been the California Air Resources Board. And California has its own concoction of summer gasoline that's different from everybody else. So I know summer gasoline, it sounds simple, but across the U.S., depending on the size of the city, location, there's actually over a dozen different types of this summer gasoline in use. And that makes switching over so much more logistically challenging. And in California, obviously, a refinery goes down, and the challenge for California is that you're a bit of a petro island. There's not the level of interconnectedness. So when a refinery does go down in the West Coast, you guys are kind of all on your own and rely on imports from other countries. And that's what's happening. So to answer the question on relief, it is coming. San Diego's average price is already down a couple cents a gallon in the last week. Refineries are getting back online. And that's the most crucial piece to solve the high gas prices that you're experiencing. So I would expect that relief to continue. And San Diego's average price will probably fall under $4 a gallon and thus stay there so long as there are no new refinery issues, and that could stick around for the course of the summer. So this $4 a gallon gas should be moved out of the way.
Well, so you heard it from Patrick DeHaan, California and San Diego. We are officially an island. We are separate from everyone. Patrick, thank you so much. The smartest guy in the energy business, Patrick DeHaan. GasBuddy.com. Go to GasBuddy.com. Check it out. All right. Great to have you along. It is San Diego Business Saturday. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Sully Speaks. Also, Kogo.com, keyword Sully. You can also catch me in the mornings at KOSI and right here on News Radio 600 Kogo, filling in for George for a while. More San Diego Business Saturday next, but first, here's news and traffic. News Radio 600 Kogo. News Radio 600 Kogo at San Diego Business Saturday. Welcome to your Mother's Day weekend. Aren't you glad this week's over, at least with the market? Things are going to get better, though. I can promise you that. Thanks again to Christina Gustin from UBS Financial and Patrick DeHaan from GasBuddy.com. I use GasBuddy.com almost every day. That's where you hear all my wisdom in the energy market. I'm ripping off from Patrick, so you can go find it yourself there. Every week I get to interview an interesting CEO in San Diego. And sometimes we bring in, some heavy hitters like Steve Forbes and such. But I like the San Diego heavy hitters, and I especially like the ones that have homegrown their business here in San Diego. And you've heard a number of those stories over the last few months. I can tell you one of my favorite stories, only because I like the guy so much, and it was such an interesting, disruptive idea. And you wouldn't think there's anything in clothing, especially with respect to men's clothing, that would be disruptive. When you think of men's clothing, I'm not talking about those Robert Graham shirts where you flip up the collar and such. I'm talking about a vertical called athleisure. Athleisure is when you see in your local grocery store the mom or the female wearing what I'm just going to use the brand name, Lululemon pants. What you used to work out in and just work out in and go home and change into your everyday clothes, people are wearing every day, and that's called the athleisure sort of business. Well, Joe Kudla from Vuori saw that opportunity. He is the founder and CEO of Vuori. They're one of the fastest growing active lifestyle companies, apparel brands in the U.S. They have a very, very loyal fan base in a very competitive industry. I always ask myself, who's the guy that's going to wake up in the morning and say to himself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go compete with a namesake like Lululemon or a namesake like Quicksilver. And that's exactly what he did. I mentioned the story before we got Joe on the air about he and I talking at one point, and he said there's 5 million men in the U.S. that practice yoga. I, as you know, don't happen to be one of them. However, none of them were brand loyal. And what they were doing is they were surreptitiously looking in the men's section of Lululemon when their wives were shopping there. So embarrassingly enough, they felt like they were wearing their wives' clothing. And Joe saw an opportunity there, and that's where the story picks up here. Joe, great to have you along today. That's about close, right?
Yeah, spot on, Sully. Stoked to be here. Thank you so much.
So here's the deal. So you started out as an accountant, CPA. What was it? Were you an analyst?
Yeah.
What? Tell me that story.
Yeah, I worked in the audit practice with San Diego's Ernst & Young.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
So you were a bean counter.
I was.
So you were filling in little boxes with your pen and numbers and stuff like that.
I would. And now I'm getting audited, and I understand what those guys were going through on the other end.
Can I ask you, what was the leap that took, because you were obviously an active guy. You were always an athlete, surfer, outdoors guy here in San Diego. What got you to say, okay, I got a pretty good deal going here. I got a degree. I got a good job. I'm in a stable profession. It takes a long time to get here. Yeah. What made you give all that up and think that you could do something so ambitious?
Man, well, first of all, I'll say I'm a sucker for the old adage that says when you're on your deathbed and you look back and you say, I didn't take that risk. I knew that I would be one of those guys if I didn't jump when I saw an opportunity. And so I guess I would first and foremost say that. But there was kind of. So
you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't do it.
Yeah, I'm always one for taking the risk and taking the plunge. And I'd kind of set up my lifestyle in a way that it wasn't going to be catastrophic if it didn't work. But I was definitely walking away from a really great career when I decided to make this decision.
So what's step one? What was talk about the germination of the idea? I mean, the day that you said to yourself, this is where because you could have gone in a number of different directions in the apparel business. What made you go in that one direction?
Well, to kind of fully understand it, it's a culmination of a lot of things. But, I did study accounting when I was in college. I played played lacrosse at University of San Diego. And when I graduated, I got this really random opportunity to go and model in Europe.
Okay.
And my friends still give me a hard time about that. But,
well, who wouldn't? Because, if you're going to go model, we're going to make fun of you. Yeah. Simple as that.
So I went over there. I graduated from college, and I headed over to Europe, to Milan. And I had an incredible experience. I was supposed to come back and start work in the fall at Ernst & Young. And I met a lot of incredible people, had a lot of incredible life experience, and I decided to postpone that. So I spent 2 years traveling the world doing that. And I did actually hate being a model. I didn't like being in front of the camera, but I loved watching the designers and what they did to build these assortments of product and bring ideas to life. And it was just very inspiring to me.
So when you were there, you're doing a photo shoot, but you were able to, in between all of that, go back and watch how they did it. And you realize, oh, this is how it's done. Because there is a secret sauce, let's face it. Who hasn't wanted to put a T-shirt out because they had a really cool, people, there's a secret sauce in my mind about restaurants, because not all, you could put the restaurant in the greatest location in the world and it's not going to be guaranteed to make it. You could have the coolest t-shirt, coolest pair of board shorts, whatever. It's not necessarily guaranteed going to go. There is a secret sauce. And I think you learned that there by going and watching, where it all started, correct?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I think it was just really inspiring to watch people. It was a peek behind the curtain. And so it demystified it a little bit. I'd always loved product, and I grew up without, a lot. Our family was rich in love, but not material things. And but I always loved watching brands, and I loved product, and I loved gear. But I never had any intention of really doing anything in the space. But going overseas and having that experience gave me a little peek behind the curtain. But it wasn't until many years later that I decided to actually do something in apparel.
Sure.
So I had returned from that experience. I went to work with Ernst & Young, got my CPA license, and started a consulting business in finance and technology in my mid-20s, and had built a really great business over about a 10-year run here in San Diego. And it was about that time that I got into yoga as kind of the first restorative thing I had ever done to heal my body from a lot of back pain.
Okay.
And that was when I had that aha moment.
So the light bulb went on and said, "Okay, wait a second. I'm doing yoga in board shorts and a Lululemon T-shirt here, and this ain't working."
Yeah,
for me.
absolutely. If I looked at the market at the time, you had the mainstream athletic brands that I grew up with, the Nikes, the Under Armours, and they were really competing on cost, not quality. They were distributed at mass retail, and the way that consumers were shopping and interacting with brands was evolving and changing. And there was this whole new kind of vertical, this D2C landscape that was opening up to us. And Lululemon.
So this is a behemoth, man. I mean, if you think in terms, like, look at it, just like we were talking Uber earlier. Uber really started the gig economy. Lululemon, I would argue, started the athleisure business. And in other words, and I say that, and I want people to understand exactly what I'm saying by that. Is that guys always wore shorts and gym shorts and stuff walking around. That was just guys. But at some point, there became an outfit out of a woman wearing a pair of Nike shoes, a pair of Lululemon athletic tights, a shirt with her hair pulled back, and a baseball cap.
Yeah.
Suddenly that became a thing.
That was a fashion statement.
And it's still, and that's not going anywhere because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
It looks good. And they can go right from the gym to the grocery store to whatever they're doing.
That's right.
But guys never had that.
No.
And how, because I have to tell you, I wouldn't have recognized the fact that we didn't have that.
Yeah.
How did you figure that out? Was it necessity as a mother invention? You were in yoga and were uncomfortable, or how did that work?
It really started out of you hear a lot of entrepreneurs say it. It's a little cliche, but it was we couldn't find what we were looking for.
Okay.
Lululemon had a small men's assortment, but it was in the corner of their stores. It was pretty much an afterthought. And at the time, you had a lot of other brands that were launching to follow. We call them Me Too brands. They were essentially following in Lulu's footsteps, focused on that female consumer.
Right.
Nobody was paying any attention to the guys. And, I was really fortunate to have found yoga as a practice that was supporting me in my life at the time. And I looked around and I just kept seeing more and more guys showing up to yoga. But what was interesting about the guys showing up to yoga is maybe they didn't identify themselves as yogis per se. They were surfers, they were mountain bikers, they were runners, they were professionals. They associated with all of these other things, but they use yoga as a tool to keep them in the game, so to speak, and keep them healthy.
Guys are riding bikes, they're sore, they go in. Guys are lifting weights, they're sore, they're inflexible. Guys are surfing, they're inflexible, they have an injury.
That's
right. It was almost like an also ran, like I'm also going to do yoga.
Yeah.
At the same time, it started catching on, and then suddenly.
Yeah. And we watched what Lulu was doing, bringing product to this market as an afterthought, but people were adopting it and buying it in droves because it was better construction, it felt better, the quality was better. People had never really felt athletic wear like that. So my hat's off to them. They really did create the category, even in men's, to go way up channel when the rest of the market was going down channel.
Sure.
They created this category, and we were really inspired by that. But here's the thing. Lulu always felt like it was our wives' deal.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, honestly, when you nailed it when you first told me that in 2015, is it feels like I'm wearing my wife's brand.
Yeah.
It feels like, look at, it would be like I guess it would be like a gal, wearing Under Armour.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
absolutely.
Right? I mean, Under Armour makes great stuff, but
That's right.
it really isn't categorized for women.
That's right. Yeah. And to take it one step further, we also looked around where we lived, in the most beautiful place in the world. Thank you, San Diego.
Sure.
But, we are very, very fortunate to live in North County, San Diego. It's this stretch of coast in downtown, Encinitas is where I call home. But, it's this incredibly aspirational place on the coast, and there's a look and a feel and an effortlessly cool personality of this town. And we wanted to carry that spirit into activewear. When you looked at what a lot of the bigger brands were doing, they were inspired by team sport athletics or kind of urban street culture. Even Lulu, originated in Vancouver, very urban inspired. And we wanted to take our inspiration from our backyard, and that's the beach, the place where we spend all our time, where we love to call home.
Well, and the interesting part of this is as you talk about some of those brands that you went straight up against. I mean, you still are in a very competitive space with massive brands like we just talked about, Under Armour and like Lululemon and even Nike. What's interesting though, as we take a look at this stuff, is did you ever think that those massive brands would start changing the way they're advertising and changing the way they're designing because of this little brand called Vuori? You've changed not just your life and your industry, you changed their industry too. We'll talk about that coming back in just a second. His name is Joe Cudley. He's the CEO of Vuori. It's spelled V-U-R-O-I. We'll tell you what that means in a moment. You can go to vuori.com. Check him out. You can also actually go into the store in Encinitas. I'm sure there's other locations across the country too. We'll talk about that. But boy, what a great story. We're going to talk a little bit about what it took to carve that out and about how important our San Diego culture is to the success of this company. It's San Diego Business Saturday. I'm Sully, News Radio 600 KOGO.
Wow, wait a second, man. What do you think the teacher's going to look?
San Diego Business Saturday, News Radio 600 KOGO. Great to have you along today. By the way, catch me weekdays for the time being and for George Chamberlain in the morning with the San Diego Morning News with Ted and LaDonna. Also, KUSI Television in the mornings on Good Morning San Diego, and of course, Big Biz Show with Russ T. Nails. We've been around for 20 years. That's national television and radio. You can find us at bigbizshow.com or follow me on all platforms at Sully Speaks. While you're online, I also want you to go to vuori.com. That's spelled VUORI.com, and it is the brand that was created by Joe Cudley. Joe Cudley is our guest today. He is the founder and CEO of VuoriClothing.com. By the way, do you have more? You have your store in Encinitas. Is there more than one store they can walk into in Encinitas, or is that the place? Because you can find Vuori in Nordstrom, you find it everywhere.
Yeah.
But the actual store is just in Encinitas, right?
Yeah, that's right. We have a store in Encinitas, we have a store in Manhattan Beach, and one in the Marina on Union Street in San Francisco.
Wow.
And we're opening likely 2 more this year.
So, but speaking, let's just jump over there. That wasn't your main deal, walking into a store and buying clothes. You went B2C from the very beginning, didn't you?
We did. We had to. It was out of necessity. I like to tell the story of when I first launched, I carried 2 suitcases of samples to New York and walked into any retailer that would talk to me and got a lot of no's. And almost out of necessity, we had to pivot our strategy away from wholesale, i.e. selling to other retailers.
Is that how it was done at that time? Basically, was it you'd walk in, you'd try to get a pitch with somebody, and they look at it and they say, yeah, this is never going to fly.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yoga's for women. Athleisure wear is for ladies. This will never work.
It was a little early to be talking about this category for men. Yeah, it was very focused on women. A lot of retailers were still trying to address that concern where their customers were walking in wearing Lululemon, and they needed to address that. So if they were looking at this category at all, it was for women, not men.
Can I ask you something? Because I do want to talk about the B2C, but fast forward to now, the success. I mean, as I see you in Inc. magazine, I believe you did something in Forbes. I've seen you on national television. This story has gone viral about this surfer, and they love to call you a model surfer. Like you've been categorized into a caricature, by the way. Right. You're no longer an accountant. You have no brain. You're just a surfer from San Diego that created a brand, right? You realize that's how it's going to be.
Right.
Do any of those buyers that said no before have they ever tipped their hat to you? Did you ever, because you're in their stores now. Yeah. You realize every place you went to in New York, I'm assuming, now carries your stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's come full circle for sure.
Not for you to point your finger in their chest, but have they acknowledged that's that kid that was knocking on the door?
I hear it a lot more from investors that call me that turned down an opportunity to invest in the business in the early days, more so than I hear it from buyers. But yeah, I mean, everybody's so excited about what's happened with the brand, and most people are just, congratulating.
Just for the record, me and my group tried to invest in Joe, and he had enough money he wouldn't take it. He didn't need it at that point. let's talk about the B2C. So you went to these places, knocked on the doors. You got a lot of no's.
Yeah, we got a lot of no's. And so, we were actually, rewind the clock, back to 2014, 2015, we were kind of running out of money. We had raised a small friends and family round. We were kind of running out of money. And
by the way, just for our listeners, a friends and family round is that literally seed round.
Yeah.
It's most businesses, when they go to raise money, it's a term now in investment banking called friends and family. And it's prior to you going out there and actually doing a real raise. It's basically telling all your friends, hey, I got this idea. I got my own money into this thing. Can you kick down $10, $20, $30,000? Mom, dad, credit cards, everything you can. That's the friends and family round, literally, isn't it?
That's right. And it's not easy to do when you're trying to present an apparel opportunity.
It's the hardest thing to do.
It's kind of like, and you'd liken this as a musician, but it's kind of like going to your friends and saying, I'm starting a band. We're going to be the next Rolling Stones, and I want you to support me.
I want to stop down on this for a minute, because Uber because I saw your investment pitch. Yeah. You'd already raised the money, but I was, this is general partners in a VC. I wanted to hear about it. Imagine Uber going to their investors and saying, I have this idea. We're going to be the biggest taxi cab company in the world. We're not going to own one single car. We're not going to have one single employee. I mean, honestly, you were the same it was the same sort of uphill battle. Yeah. But there's a reason guys like Jeff Bezos, who invested $3 million, made $400 million yesterday on the IPO of Uber. There's a reason that you guys that took that chance in the beginning, if you go public or if you get acquired or whatever that path to liquidity is going to be, there's a reason they should get that. And I think that's a lesson in risk reward, because it can't be easy in the beginning. Right. It would never work that way. If it was an obvious one, you wouldn't have been the first to market in this space.
That's right. A lot of people did.
And hats off to those investors who saw the foresight of it, right?
Absolutely. We're so incredibly grateful for those people that took that risk. But yeah, going back to what we were saying, it was tough sledding in the early days. Our strategy to launch through other retailers was a little bit flawed in a lot of ways, and we had to pivot quickly. And so we were fortunate to be early in Facebook and social media advertising, and that when we focused our attention away from wholesalers to our direct customer and building a relationship with them through our website, through great customer service, through delivering product and listening to what they had to say, that was really the pivoting and defining moment for the brand. We started to define that engine of growth, and we could show investors the path to profitability, and the rest was kind of...
one thing I never saw with you guys was influencers. A lot of apparel brands, to their credit, we'll find an influencer that's very visible. I mean, let's take Michael Jordan, is probably the easiest one to think about, or Tiger Woods, right, with Nike. Unless there's a yoga star that's on ESPN right after bowling, I haven't seen him yet. Right. You guys didn't take that route necessarily. You took a lot of like-looking individuals, a lot of like-lifestyle individuals, and it all came down to your influencer was culture. Versus person, right?
Yeah,
and it was San Diego culture.
Yeah, that's right. We really thought, this way of life here in San Diego is very aspirational. Who doesn't want to live the California dream? And surf brands had been exporting that lifestyle to the rest of the United States for a long time, and nobody had really brought that same DNA to athletic wear. And so we wanted to be authentic. It was who we were. Sure. We resonated with the surf brands that kind of originated in our backyard. We wanted to bring that spirit, that aesthetic into activewear.
By the way, just so you know, they don't just make men's tight. In fact, they don't make. I think they make some sweats, but this is shorts. This is board shorts. This is shirts. There are some things for women. I mean, I can tell you, you already know this, and I will tell you, even though Joe's a friend of mine, I refuse to pay anything other than full retail because I want to see your business grow. But I'm in that damn shop like once a month. I'm sure that your people tell you. I have to ask this though. For those people that have small businesses in town and people that have dipped their toe into the Facebook, Google advertising world, it's good to hear that it works, but it's not, you can't just throw money at it because it's very prescriptive, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely. You have to have a strategy just like anything. Otherwise you are throwing your money away.
Because you can't just say, I'm going to spend $10,000 on Facebook advertising. That doesn't matter.
No.
There's a prescription to it, correct?
No, and you've got to be really, you have to be very intentional with who you're targeting, right? Who are you presenting those ads to? What happens after they've seen an ad? That's just the beginning. That's the top of the funnel. There's a long path to purchase. So, we're establishing messaging and building trust with the consumer all the way to purchase. And then after they purchase, how are we taking care of them and nurturing them back into their second purchase? So it's a science, it's an art and a science. And
it really is, because I've seen it with our programming we do, and I've seen it with music where you can go from nothing to something without necessarily going viral and being on TMZ.
No, people ask us all the time, what was the tipping point? And we didn't have Kim Kardashian wearing our products. We weren't on Oprah.
Nobody was tweeting about you.
For us, it was just slow, steady growth, making the right brand decisions at every step of the way and delivering a great product. Our product, we believe very strongly, is very differentiated. We say it's built to move and styled for life. That's our design ethos. So everything's going to transition from workout to everyday wear. That's like the cornerstone and hallmark of our brand and why people love it so much. But we invest so much energy into making great product, and it all leads with product. The world's too transparent of a place right now. You can't deliver a bad product. So we put our money where our mouth is. We invest in product, and we hire really great people.
Well, and your consumer is skeptical these days because we have so much research at our fingertips. You can't phone it in anymore.
Right.
I mean, that's and not to say that that all brands don't. All brands go 100% all the time, but sometimes they don't. I guess this last piece of this thing for the social media side is that does give that sheds a rainbow of hope for some small businesses who don't have the resources, just because you probably will never do a commercial on national television out of necessity. You'll do it because you think it's a good idea, but you won't do it as your main focus. Like you'll never be the Nike guys because you don't have to.
Right.
At the same time, I just can't see Nike. Now that they've already gone down that road, deploying a social media campaign that's going to make any difference because they're already. Do you think you'll ever use traditional forms of advertising? You'll ever need to, other than just for fun to see what happens?
Believe it or not, a lot of the kind of older school ways of reaching customers are coming back in style because your cost for reaching a certain audience size on television has come down, and you can do programmatic buys on television where you can actually get very granular with the types of households.
So a Super Bowl ad in Opelika, Alabama, right in the middle of halftime, right?
That's right.
Isn't that sort of how that works?
Yeah, I mean, you can get very specific, and so it's a great way of reaching an audience, and it's all about getting your message out there and whatever channel is available to you. And it tends to start on digital these days, but it can end in television, direct mail, and billboards.
I consult with enough businesses, off air to know that I know that a lot of people think the holy grail is social media, and I want to let people have people beware about that. And I'll give you music, for example. We released a single in September. And I thought, we need to get our search engine out. And our digital media guy said, there's not a single person that's going to listen to your music that's going to search for you on Google. That's not where you go. Did you guys hire a digital media strategist at the time, or did you guys kind of create it as you went along? Because that exists now.
Yeah.
But how did you do that?
Well, when we started the business, it was just our head of marketing and myself. There was only 3 of us, and we kind of just had to figure it out on our own. We hired a digital marketing agency. There's a lot of them out there that are great, that have a lot of insights, and they're great at getting you out of the gates, so to speak. But when you get to a certain point, you do want to bring that knowledge in-house.
Listen, man, I could talk to you for 3 hours. You know how much I love this brand. VuoriClothing.com, VUORI. His name is Joe Cudla. Man, best of luck to you. I can't tell you how happy I am for you. I wish I would have met you a month earlier because I would have gotten the deal. But I love to see the success out of it, and I love to see it. I love to see what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. All right. That does it for us. Thanks so much to Christina Gustin and Patrick DeHaan, and of course, Joe Cudla from Vuori Clothing. Isn't that a great story? Got another San Diego CEO. San Diego Business Saturday, News Radio 600 Kogo.